So this book is important for, of course, a number of reasons. It's the first edition of the publication of David Walker's Appeal, but it's also a copy owned by W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the preeminent scholar of the 20th century as it relates to African American history and life. I would say the chances are great that he had this both as a student when he was at Harvard, but also in his own personal library, of course, when he was teaching at Atlanta University and throughout his life and career. And I would argue that in his 1903 volumes, The Souls of Black Folk, he's actually speaking to David Walker. And there's a passage that he is actually remembering Walker and some of the other brave souls that pushed back against slavery and then into segregation, into Jim Crow. Du Bois writes, and this is in Souls of Black Folk of Our Spiritual Strivings, he says, "The history of the American Negro is a history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double life into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He would not Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world and Africa. He would not bleach his Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that Negro blood has a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and an American without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face." And so while David Walker is appealing to the enslaved to rise up against their masters and those that would keep them in bondage, Du Bois is asking for acknowledgement of this, the selves being both the Negro and the American, what he's calling and identifies as double consciousness. But he also acknowledges the fact that there are those who have attempted to bridge this gap for generations that have failed because there's no dialogue, there's no way to enter into the conscious of these people that would keep people as chattels, that would oppress people. The magnitude of this institution and what it's done to these individuals and their spirit. It wasn't just ignorance to the world, it was just ignorance to the self. You believe that you were a beast. You believe that you were not worthy of any kind of compassion, human compassion, if anything. It is a series of essays that really, I think, inspire revolution in the hearts of men, but also it's like a foretelling of what was to come in terms of like Nat Turner's rebellion and eventually what the Civil War wrought. So I mean, the books, they work really well together because you get kind of an understanding of this pre-Civil War, abolitionist movement kind of time period in abolitionism in terms of leading to the Civil War. But you're getting these men who are using their intellect to make an argument against this institution that made beasts of people, of human beings. I would say made monsters of men. You have to imagine, and it's hard to imagine, how human beings can not only categorize other human beings as less than human, but really act out these really barbaric kind of procedures or gestures towards. I mean, it's interesting when you look through some of the materials we have in the archives that you would have actual slave documents, bills of sale, right? So human chattels. But then there are also books, there are also accounts of how these people were brutalized by the slave holders, by their overseers, by the system in and of itself. And to create a category in a society of civilization of people so low that they themselves don't know it and function at a level so low that it is horrendous to understand how you come out of that. How does one survive that? Not only physically, but mentally. How do you imagine yourself in the future? Because the only future you can imagine is day to day and not projected into the next century or the next decade, So to have the audacity to write something such as this in 1829 is to really feel, I guess, a sense of being free. I'm free to say what needs to be said, because if death is my destiny, I will embrace it. And I think he is challenging his brethren, to understand that this is no life. The challenge is to rise up and to claim your life and the lives of those yet born. And so we also have to understand that this book, published in 1829, Nat Turner's Rebellion was in 1831. And there are, connections made to this document inspiring these revolts. But the revolts were already happening. They were happening on small scale farms, they were happening on large farms. But to have this published in 1829 and then to have Nat Turner's Rebellion, it's really, telling of, the tinderbox that was America, and that this institution was bound to fail. And then later on, of course, with the Civil War, you have people like Frederick Douglass, who was agitating for justice and trying to bring the nation to understand its faults. But of course, you have half the country's population in the South that believes that this war of northern aggression is intended to change their way of life, disregarding the fact that the argument eventually becomes about the institution of slavery and keeping men and women in bondage. It's an amazing history, and amazing for a number of reasons, in both infamous ways, but also very important stories of triumph and success and perseverance. And I think in these materials that we have, all of them together tell a story. Separately, they're different kind of narratives, but together they tell the story of a people coming from, a situation or a position in a community or in a country that disregarded them, but they saw their own value. And in seeing their own value, they allowed themselves to be transformed and continue to strive towards this the place that we're in today, I guess we can say.